All right, great. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you all for joining us. Tonight, we are holding part 3 of our Black, Indigenous, People of Color Mental Health Series, and we're focusing on Indigenous mental health and recovery. And we're here with our panelist. So for those of you who are new to the series, my name is Cassandra Farrugia. I am NAMI New York State's Communication and Youth Engagement Specialist. And first, I'd like to thank the Multicultural Committee for helping me organize this series. And before we get started with tonight's event, I want to mention that we're going to be holding part 4 of the series with our special guest, Shamika Holdsclaw, who's a former women's NBA player. So look out for that one. It should be coming up in a few weeks. And now we'll turn to our speakers. Just give me 1 second. Okay, Joe, if you want to introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Joe Pritchett. I'm originally from Walle, Nevada. I'm part of the Paiute Shoshone tribe. I'm currently in San Diego, California. I am a college counselor, and I own my own therapy organization, Medicine Blanket Therapy. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. All right, and then we have here Lisa. Lisa.
Hi, my name is Lisa Oaks. I am Oneida, but I'm from the Onondaga Reservation in New York, and I work at National Grid on the Employee Resource Group as co-chair and treasurer, and I am very happy to be here today. Thank you.
Thanks so much. All right, Pete.
Good afternoon, everybody. Nice to see all of you here. My name is Pete Hill. I am a citizen of the Cayuga Nation, one of the 6 nations of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. I belong to the Heron Clan, and I work at Native American Community Services of Erie and Niagara counties as the All Relations Special Initiatives Coordinator. And I see a couple of friendly faces here, so greetings to everybody whom I haven't seen in a while, and hello to my new friends we're making tonight. So thank you.
Awesome, thank you. And Mitch and Ben?
My name is Mitch Kelly. I'm Seneca. I come from the Cattaraugus Indian Reservation. And I don't really have like a title to go with here. I would just say that I'm an activist and an advocate for mental health in my own right. So we're just gonna go with that.
And hi, I'm Ben Walle. I am owner and founder of my company, which is Black and LGBTQIA+ owned. And it's called Name Brand Lab. And I am also an activist and a supporter of social justice and mental health. And we are both partners.
Thank you. And thank you, everyone. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. So just before we get started, I want to pull up my questions. Okay, great. All right. So as you can see, we have people from different states. We have people from different counties, different reservations, different tribes, different nations. And so we have a lot of great perspectives here today. So I'm so thankful for everyone for joining us. Many Native and Indigenous tribes embrace a worldwide view that encompasses the notions of connectedness with the past and with others, strong family bonds, adaptability, oneness with nature, wisdom of elders, meaningful traditions, and strong spirit that may serve as protective factors when it comes to mental health. So I really want to hear from everyone's perspective, what cultural factors have influenced your view and your community's view, and just, in general view on mental health. So if we want to get started with that, Joe?
So in my community, normally when someone had mental illness or some type of mental health problem, it wasn't looked upon as that person needs help. It was more looked upon as that's just an issue that they'll get over, rub some dirt on it, you'll be good to go in a little while. And so, but now as we start, that's when, as I was growing up, now we start looking at it now a lot more, especially in my reservation, they're looking at it more where they have more facilitators, like they have more mental health practitioners to help out with people that they find that do have, you know, mental health or even suicidal tendencies. And unlike before, where it was more of just stay out on your own and, you know, be stoic or something, and now we have people saying, hey, let's get this person some help, let's ensure that they're not alone, let's, you know, let's help them. And I noticed that more and more tribes are now trying to reach out to more practitioners to get help that is useful on most tribes.
Thank you. And you mentioned, you know, not alone. That's a big statement here at NAMI, letting people know that they're not alone and that there's help and that there's hope out there for all of us. Lisa, what would you like to mention?
I just would like to mention, like within our communities, a lot of the younger and older generations have turned to alcohol or drugs as a mean of dealing with their trauma or mental issues. Turning to drugs and alcohol is easier than asking for help, because in our communities, like, asking for help is viewed or looked at upon in the communities as a weakness. And it's really hard to overcome, you know, getting our youth to overcome those feelings of feeling inferior for seeking help. So the easier alternative is to turn to alcohol and drug abuse as a way of dealing with their feelings or whatever stresses they're going through, instead of positive avenues. And I am here to bring the awareness about that, about those issues to the outside communities, and hopefully for the inside communities to let our youth know that there are avenues and positive ways to dealing with their issues.
Thank you. Yeah. And, you know, thinking about like people thinking it as a weakness, right? And rubbing some dirt on it. We have to end that stigma, that thinking that it's
Right.
right. Yeah. Pete?
Yeah, it's a good question. First, I want to say that what I'll be sharing is really coming from my perspective. I don't want to portray that I'm pretending or representing a whole community. I've worked in Buffalo, Western New York at my employment for nearly 29 years. So I've known a lot of people, but I'm not representing people per se with that. But what I've seen a lot is when we talk about mental health, I kind of think about it in at least two kind of groups of people, because, and not just two, there's probably many, many more. But for first attempt of trying to explain what I kind of do and everything, is one of the things that we've been looking at my workplace, Native American Community Services, is to really look at not only the impact of personal trauma. I know and I can recognize how devastating and how damaging that can be. Many of us are familiar with trauma-informed care, the ACE, adverse childhood experiences, you know, studies and things like that. But what we've been doing, some of the issues that Lisa spoke about, the alcohol, the drug abuse, and many other factors that we see going on in many Native communities throughout, I don't know, if not the US and Canada, you know, for a lot of different, not every place, but a lot, are those issues of also cancer, obesity, suicide ideation, homelessness, domestic violence, all the rest of these really some exaggerated health disparities and inequities. So what we've been looking at the same time is recognizing the tremendous value that Native people have a rich, beautiful culture. So I've been asking, how come we have a rich, beautiful culture as Native Indigenous people, yet we're so unhealthy in so many ways? So what we've been doing is that really looking at a deep exploration of the whole concept of historical trauma, because there's a whole lot of episodes, a lot of centuries of trauma. We see other people, other communities of color representing that and lifting that awareness up. And for Native Indigenous peoples, it's a very similar kind of story. So really looking at those cycles of traumas, intergenerational traumas that were caused by, if not specifically created by some of those historical traumas. So the other part that I'd want to say really quick, the two groups that I kind of mentioned about, there are a lot of people I have seen who have no awareness of that, of what that is, or they may know somebody who went through a trauma, historical trauma, but they haven't really personalized it. But a lot of my work is really helping people understand how we've been impacted, each one of us, I would say, as Native Indigenous people, by all those factors, and however we get through that. That's what we've been working on a lot. So again, a lot we could talk about here. So thanks.
Great, thank you. Mitch, Ben, your perspective?
I find it really interesting that, even though we're from different tribes and we're from different areas, the ingrained trauma affects us all in a similar way. We've all had similar experiences. For me growing up in my family, I was raised by my grandmother and she was in a boarding school, so she had a lot of internalized trauma that she had not dealt with. So, when I started showing signs of having, battling with anxiety and depression, nobody really knew how to handle that because they had no concept of mental health and, what to do about that. Unfortunately, we see a lot of generational trauma. And like Lisa said, people turn into alcohol and drugs. I can be vulnerable here and say that I'm 15 months sober from alcohol, but it was a battle for me. And it wasn't until I was able to kind of, I got myself into therapy and started taking real, control over my own mental health and kind of seeing what was, the motivation for those things and what parts of myself were lacking or needed that kind of nourishment. And also coming from my perspective too, I identify as two-spirited, but in the outside world off of the reservation, for people that don't understand the concept of two-spirit, I say that I'm gay. This is my partner, we're both gay. But for me, two-spirited, I didn't actually learn about that until I was 25 and I was in a rehab facility actually. And one of the women there, I was talking to her and she's like, I don't know why you keep describing yourself as being gay, you're two-spirited. And then I kind of, after I left treatment, I did my own research on it. And, I got to see more of a spiritual significance that kind of not only touched on my native roots, but also, who I was internally and who I was in my truth. And I had never seen that represented in my community in any way. Nobody ever talks about queer Indigenous youth, Indigenous people. There was nobody to look up to. So I had followed down a very just like self-destructive path. And it wasn't until, realizing that everybody's affected by this trauma. And it's our duty, as Indigenous people to reclaim what's been taken from us, which is kind of like what me and my partner Ben have been working on, which is with this past June, we were able to get our president to raise our first pride flag. And it was a struggle. We had to host a rally and everything because they didn't want to touch on that subject. But it was like, it's 2021. If, feeling marginalized within my own community affected me to the point that I fell into addiction myself, and I'm still fighting addiction to this day. What else could we do to help people that feel like they're not recognized or part of their own tribe? We're all kind of oppressed or been oppressed. No matter where you're from, if you're Native American, you've been oppressed since the beginning. But we have to include everybody that is Native American, you know what I mean? And bringing people that are not a part of the conversation to the discussion. That's kind of where I come from. That's my perspective on things.
Yeah, and I definitely think, to echo what Mitch said, is, bring people in on the conversation, and not only just the, Native, Indigenous people. I think it's also important to bring allies in as well. And that's, where I come in. Obviously, being Black, we share a lot of the same generational traumas. And a lot of them are not talked about, and you're looked at as having an addiction or mental illness, as shame, and there's this stigma attached to it. And I think that, you know, it's kind of up to us, just as regular members of community and the society, to really speak up and speak out and bring awareness to these things, to try to release that stigma. And I think we do that by not shaming other people, but sharing our stories and telling our stories. And, you know, that's how we connected as well. And I think that also it's kind of our job too, to really talk to our leaders, because, you know, we really haven't had that come to Jesus moment, period, on any of the generational traumas in this country. And, you know, instead of just keep putting a Band-Aid on these deep seated scars, it's time to really start from the ground up and treating the root cause. And so I'm just honored to be a part of the discussion and, you know, be a part of his life and share a lot of the same kind of, you know, social justice warrior vibes that we like to share and spread. So I'm glad that I can be here.
Thank you both. And yeah, just, you know, congratulations on the recovery. That's great and amazing. Thank you for sharing that. I know it's really personal. And
You know,
just,
it is personal, but I've learned, like, over time that, you know, my first time ever speaking about, you know, my struggles with alcoholism and stuff like that, I was concerned about the way people would view me afterwards. But I've learned that it's actually a way to connect with people. And
yeah,
people, whether they're not comfortable to or not yet, they may know somebody that have been affected through alcoholism, or it's touched their lives in some way, that it no longer kind of feels like a sense of like, oh, well, you know, I had a problem with drinking and like, this is embarrassing to say. Like, it more comes as like it's turned more to like a form of power than it has kind of like shame. And that comes from sharing like what we're doing now.
right. And Beverly in the comments said, you know, right, Mitch, sharing our stories is how we open doors for others to hear us, not just see us. And
Absolutely.
yeah, I really like that. So I wanted to share that. And, you know, that's what we have to do with everything, right? Have that connectedness, start sharing our stories. Because once you share something, someone else sees that disclosure and they're willing to be vulnerable with you. And
Right.
you can see that there's so many things we all have in common, and we're just keeping it at home. So just a little background on me, I'm Puerto Rican or Boricua. And so, you know, growing up in a Latinx family, you know, it was like what happens at home stays at home. You know, we're not going to talk about these issues outside. And it took a long time for me to be able to share about like my anxiety and my depression and have other people, you know, every time I say it, someone's like, oh yeah, me too. And it's amazing how often you're greeted with someone in that, instead of being like, oh no, like what you're thinking is going to be a negative response. But thank you. And, you know, Ben, again, like we need more allies. We need to be working in solidarity and doing this work. So thank you for bringing that up for sure. And I know Joe does a lot of generational trauma work. So Joe, do you want to add anything there?
So when during my doctoral paperwork, I did a lot of research in the generational trauma, and I found that a lot of it, especially within our communities, and like Ben had said earlier, you know, with you know, Blacks and even, you know, the Latinx communities, they have generational traumas that just continues along. So for the Native American community, we have it where we have, you know, the boarding school experience, and then we have the Relocation Act, and these two things alone hadn't stopped. So the Relocation Act stopped. They stopped doing it in the 80s. That's not too long ago. So a lot of us have family members that partook in those government events that causes a lot of trauma. You're leaving your reservation. If you were in the boarding school, you left your reservation. You were told not to speak your language. And a lot of these have a lot to do with, if you don't know who you are as a person, and you go into almost like a new world, and you don't know who you are, you don't know your language, you're speaking English mainly, but then we go back home, you can't speak to your own family members because they speak your traditional language. At that point, you start to wonder who you are as a person. And a lot of people, that's when they turn, like Lisa had said earlier, they turned to alcoholism. That's why you saw a lot in the 70s where a lot of people that were in the relocation centers, they were becoming homeless, along with, you know, a rise in alcoholism and drug use. And, you know, same thing happened. A lot of people would say, you know, suck it up. But what ended up happening is those people had children, and those children got to see what was going on. And then generational trauma in turn happened again. And now you have children that are having issues on top of the issues that came from the parents originally. So, you know, not to sound like a poster, but, you know, we have to stop it somewhere. We have to stop the generational trauma somewhere. And everyone, you know, as we start speaking about it, understanding it more, and kind of embracing it, and knowing where it starts and how it manifests, that's when we can start saying, okay, we need to change our culture. Because for most, and it's kind of funny, there's a new show that's going to be coming out called Reservation Dogs.
Yes, on FX.
And now if you look at that, and even that trailer, I was laughing at the trailer because most kids that grew up on a reservation have seen those things that are going to go on in that movie or that TV show. Most Native children understand, oh, I have an alcoholic uncle, or I have a drug addicted uncle or aunt. Everyone has that. And these are things that just carry with you until the point that it starts to affect you. And, you know, most research has shown that if most children that are I think someone in the chat said ACEs, and it's true, most children who get affected by some type of trauma by the age of 5 years old, those developmental years, they start to show signs of mental distress as they get older, and it just carries on.
And that's when they mentally, emotionally kind of stop too, developing.
Right. And a lot of times it's not even seen until they get to school. So let's say high school, that's when, you know, stuff hits the fan, you know, and you start having issues. That's when alcoholism in the Native community, alcoholism and drug abuse start at an earlier age than most other ethnicities. It starts around 10 years old. And if you really think about it, that's around the time that you are leaving your house and getting new friends, and, you know, going outside to school and things like that. And that's when a lot of that stuff is, I don't know who I am, because I see these people, I look like these people by my skin tone, but I'm not this person, you know. And it's a lot, and you see that a lot of times within our communities. I'm sorry, I took over that.
Oh, no, thank you.
I completely agree. And back to your point, I think like with the show on FX, I think that also representation too matters. And I think a lot of the time that, you know, it took me a very long time to see a Black gay male on TV. I think the first one was My So-Called Life, but I was not even allowed to watch that. And I think in the Native community, what do they have to even see that? And I think that when you see instances of representation, or like you said, that's my uncle, that's my dad, and the issues are addressed, it starts to turn a certain thing in your brain where you see that and you're like, okay, I'm not the only one, and you see issues being solved or dealt with head on. And I think that you can kind of emulate that in your own life as well. So it's very important.
What I picked up.
This is a really good conversation, and I knew it would be. And, you know, because once you start to scratch the surface of everything, all these things come out. And, you know, I'm really grateful and looking forward to hearing the rest of it and what we're going to talk about. But I wanted to bring another layer of understanding when we talk about intergenerational trauma, historical trauma, and intergenerational dysfunction, health disparities, and all that. I don't want anybody to think that Native people have been oppressed horribly, you know, throughout the centuries. And I don't want anybody to have the impression, oh, these poor Native people have been through trauma, let's help them, or things like that. And the reason I say that is that from the beginning of, if you want to go, look in history, go back to the year 1452, there were decrees from the Roman Catholic Pope, not to disrespect anybody's belief in a higher power, religion, or anything like that. But there were decrees that were passed many, many times that said that people who are not European Catholic Christian people are not really human beings. And it was there was the doctrine of discovery is what it's called, just go out and explore all these different worlds and to so-called discover these worlds. And from then, it was always seemed that the Europeans who explored in different places around the world, including Africa, including Australia, including here in the Americas, including Asia, they consider themselves to be superior because that's what they were taught, that's what they were told, and that's what that doctrine of discovery talked about. So from day one, it isn't just that Native people have suffered or experienced high rates of alcoholism. All those things were purposely done to Native people because Native people, one of the priorities that the American government and governments before was to get rid of us, to attempt a full genocide of Native people throughout this continent, throughout North, South, and Central. And they did. They were very nearly successful at that because I've seen a lot of research in my studies as well, like depopulation rates of 90, 95, 98%, and many times 100%. There are states right now within the US that have no Native people, nations or tribes or people recognized because they're dead, they've been gone. So when you talk about alcohol was purposely introduced to Native populations as a way of negotiating treaties, get them drunk and they'd sign everything away. If you look at education policies, I heard a presentation, a few from the whole origin of federal education policies for Native people was the assumption that Native people were inferior and that we needed to be lifted up to assimilate into a civilized society. They looked at us as being deficient from day one. So when we talk about these historical traumas, the reason I share this is that if you identify as an American, this is American history as well as it is Native history. This doesn't just belong to Native people, it's all of ours responsibility. And I really like what some of the people are saying, what are we doing about it? And that's why we have these conversations, because one of the things that we've been working on a lot is not just identifying the trauma, but how can we create pathways towards healing? And I just had a conversation with a good friend this morning, because of these rates of alcoholism and domestic violence and suicide, all the rest of it, I heard an elder years ago who said, how can we be sovereign as Indigenous people when we're killing ourselves, we're killing each other, and we're doing things to ourselves? So it's all about how can we promote healing, the way I look at it, for all of our people. And I also am two-spirit myself, so I always make sure who's not included, who's not at the table, who are we leaving out, because one of the things that has happened because of the trauma, social norms have changed. That traditionally we would never have alcohol, we'd never have, we had a good life and things like that. But nowadays, or up until recently, there's always been a social norm that to have a party, you got to have alcohol there. And why? And people in recovery, also in recovery myself too, we learn we don't need that stuff. We don't, that's another tool to get rid of us and everything. So I just wanted to bring that other layer into that discussion. It isn't, just, these poor Native people have suffered. No, there was a lot more intent that was try to get rid of us. Like I said, almost a complete genocide of Indigenous people.
All right, thank you so much, Pete. So many different topics. Don't know what to touch on first, but first I'll go back to what Ben was saying with media. In one of our other series, I want to say it was part 2, Black mental health, we're talking about, no, the first one, the history of BIPOC mental health. Me and Dr. Waite were talking about the importance of representation, and not just representation, seeing people, but what they're talking about on media. What are, I think it was one of the housewives shows where they had like a couples retreat, and just like seeing people in therapy and discussing their feelings openly on television is really, something we don't think about, but it's really opening doors for so many other people to have those conversations at home that maybe they never did before. And it's really important. We think it's like, oh, it's just something on TV, but you know, seeing that representation, seeing these conversations, seeing people that look like you and your family members, and saying, wow, like I'm saying, right, like these are people that are just like me, and I'm not the only one feeling that way. I know growing up watching like Friends, no one looked like me on there, not knowing, yeah, like not understanding what life was going to look like for me when I was in my 30s. You know, it's interesting to see how these things are changing now. And now I just want to go back to healing. So thinking about the solutions that each of you have and bring with your perspective. So we'll start with Lisa, and if you can tell us the work you're doing over at National Grid and how you're connecting people to services.
At National Grid, I am working, so with our employee resource group, it kind of dwindled and went sideways. But in the past 3 years, we've revived our group, our resource group. And I find it really difficult because our population is, you know, minuscule among the employee or among National Grid as a whole. And people believe or think that just because it's a Native American Indigenous group that they can't be a member, but our membership is open to all employees as allies. And a part of our work is to educate the communities outside of our reservations with what is happening within our communities and what we're doing, awareness on the residential schoolings, on the trauma that our communities are dealing with at this current time, the healing that we have to go through. Just my work has to do with bringing awareness to our outside communities.
Great, thank you, Lisa. All right, and let's go to Joe. What work are you doing with Medicine Blanket that's helping, you know, end some of these gaps and disparities?
So let me go back, when I started my doctoral program, I was looking at ways to integrate mental health issues that are being seen on the reservation. So what I did is I developed an intervention. There's interventions around that are still kind of similar to what I'm doing, but the only difference between mine is mine starts at an earlier age. So what it is basically, like I said earlier, a lot of issues. I'm not saying that parents are bad. You know, I have parents myself. I'm a parent, but what it is the intervention works with parents, and it gets them under the kind of like helps them with how to raise their children. And when I say raise your children, saying basically raising them using your cultural aspects. So if you're Shoshone, you're gonna go through, learn how to smudge. You're gonna, do all the ceremonies. And the reason why you have the, therapy and your tribal way of healing is because it integrates them both together. So then you can basically become a whole person again. And so that's what my intervention is working on. So right now I'm trying just to get it running. So, working with medicine men to see what they can do to help, so at that, instead of giving a prescription of a medicine, you could give a prescription of going to a sweat lodge, and things like that. That's what I'm working on right now.
Thank you. Yeah, you bring up a great, the different ways of having treatment and support, whether it's spiritual or traditional healers from different medical sources. Does anyone else want to add anything about that?
Yeah, I can add. So along those lines, what I'm working on doing with National Grid is also educating our outside communities with our songs, our dances, and really letting them know that we're still here, we're still practicing our ways, and to respect our ways. And that for us, it's also an avenue for healing. All of our ceremonies, all our dancing and our dances and our songs, are ways of healing, and those are avenues that our people can utilize as alternatives to drugs and alcohol, positively.
Right, for sure. I think that, we talked in one of the other series too about spirituality and thinking about why so many people go to church and who's the people who are going to church, and seeing that it is usually people who are lower economic who can't get treatment, and what does our culture, what that space really means to us. That's our therapy. Songs, singing in church is therapy. Singing is therapy for so many different groups, and we all have our own interpretations of different spiritualities. And I think it's, so important to our healing process, and we really have to, bring more awareness to the importance of it in each group and every way that we do it. Now, I wanted to mention before some statistics that I found, that because I want to make sure this is, educational in every way for people who are less familiar with some of the different topics we were talking about. So I found that studies said that Native and Indigenous people in America start to use and abuse alcohol and other drugs at a younger age and at higher rates than all other ethnic groups. So that's what it shows. And although overall suicide rates are similar to those of white people, there are significant differences among certain age groups. The suicide rate for a Native Indigenous person in America is between the age of 15 to 19 and is more than double that of non-Hispanic whites. So we can really see the differences and why we need to keep thinking about all these reasons to fill in these gaps and heal and try to figure out what solutions we can bring. Pete, I know that you do a lot of cultural competency. So thinking about treatment, what would you like to add here?
Well, I appreciate you sharing that data because when we look at those health disparities, whether it's COVID-19, there's a lot of reports that have shown that Native people have the worst rates of death from COVID-19, and yet it's rarely recognized in mainstream media. They look at other communities of color, which is good because a lot of communities have that, similar kind of experiences and things like that. But just to recognize, a lot of these issues are very much real. And when we talk about healing, I just want to touch on that before I talk about the training a little bit. When we talk about the healing efforts, because there's so many elements and layers of these traumas, we're talking centuries. We're talking 20, 30, or 40 generations of Indigenous people who've been through traumas. And these become normalized a lot of times unless we try to do something around, different and have different paths towards that. In my work, we've really been not only researching what historical traumas are, whether it's the boarding schools, whether it's different federal policies, whatever those things are, what we've been trying to do is help our own people realize how we are impacted. We have a model called HOPE, Healing Our People Through Empowerment. The first step is helping people to recognize what those traumas are. Even in my own family, my mother went to Thomas Indian School. My grandmother went to Carlisle Residential School. And I never really learned what happened to them or how that impacted us, my family, until before my mother passed. I had a conversation with her. All right, hey, Lisa's granddaughter, yay. But that's part of the problem that that I see a lot in many of our parts of our communities, is that we know there's trauma there, but we don't really know what it means and how we're impacted. So to this day. So what we've been doing is that we've been showing documentaries. We produced a film called Unseen Tears about the residential boarding schools. We've shown that to, 30,000 people or more. It's been online for a long time. So as people are seeing that, they can understand why, for an example, their parent never held them when they were a baby. Or we heard another elder talk about, I understand why my mother never told me, son, I love you. Here we heard this 50-year-old man talking about never having that from his own mother. And because he never got that experience from his mother who went to a boarding school, he can give that to his own families. And as a result, one of his sons took his own life because he never got that love from the father who never got it from the mother. So when we think about that, what does healing mean? We also heard this gentleman who shared that story, that I understand why my mother never said she loved me. He made that decision to right then and there that night, go tell all his kids that he loved them and to decide to hug them and to, hold their little grandkids and everything like that. Because once we have that awareness, then we get to make some different decisions. We can realize that things don't have to be that way. That lesbian, gay people, transgender people aren't culturally supposed to be oppressed and kicked out. We've always accepted all of our community members. I remember asking my dad and my mom about other people who are great, gay, transgender, lesbian, bisexual, and everybody was welcomed back in the day, according to our cultures. But because of those outside influences, it may not be like that as much. But we've seen so many paths towards healing. I love hearing about everybody's work that we're doing. And I kind of look at the picture that I have in my background on Zoom is from Allegheny State Park, where they used to have some East Coast Two-Spirit retreats. That was really, really fantastic. But it's kind of like this journey, because I think a lot of Native people could be on a healing journey, as well as other community members who have historical trauma in their communities as well. So if we think about a healing journey, some people have no idea what that is, haven't even thought about it. Some people are well along their way on that healing journey, because whether it's spirituality, our connection with our Mother Earth, with each other, or whether it's organized religion, all those things can be very, very helpful, because there's so many things that we don't know as human beings. And that's why we have those ideas of spirituality and religious beliefs and everything.
Thank you. A lot to unpack there too. Let's see. So one thing I want to mention is I know I had talked to Pete about this. I had studied Native American feminisms, and what we talked about a lot was queer theory, and talking about two-spirited people and how they were they were so valued, and the stigma now with LGBTQ plus people that exists, it's just such a shame, honestly. And it's something that was a part of so many cultures and continues to be part of so many cultures. And that's something I would love to see in the forefront as well. Does anyone else want to add anything before we go to the next?
Yeah. I mean, there was a few things that I agreed with completely on, what Pete was talking about. I mean, I think that inherently, my always thought was that like most Native American people were inherently spiritual. And I think through, colonization, a lot of our spirituality was traumatized as well. And I noticed, from my own peers, a lot of people don't even know what they believe, or they don't have beliefs at all. You have people that are divided into two different groups, people that are hardcore longhouse and try to, keep the traditions alive. And then you have people that don't have any sort of beliefs or spirituality, or you have people that have, Christianity and stuff like that. And then, with the, I don't know what it would be considered, the lack of kind of, what he mentioned earlier was that, something about someone had not heard that they were loved by their mother, and, not showing that affection, that love. And where does that stem from? Why do we feel so uncomfortable sharing these very real, very human, very loving and positive things with each other, and you do remember things like that when you grow older. I had a lot of people in my life that were very hard people,
because you're told to be stoic
and you're not supposed to show a lot of emotion. And men, the only acceptable emotion that they can share is anger or rage, or what I mean. The only time I would see my uncles cry is if they were incredibly intoxicated, so all that pent up stuff and the kind of toxic masculinity and stuff that was pressed onto our people affected like us at our very core, the fabric of the reservation, and it's been my own journey kind of figuring out my own spirituality, because I was raised in the church, because that was what my grandmother was taught in boarding schools, that she was to be ashamed of being Native American, and that, I guess in a way to be the whitewashed version of Christianity was the only acceptable way to be. And that was ingrained in our head at a very young age, you know. So that affected our family dynamic and our beliefs, you know, for the future generation. A lot of my family doesn't have any spiritual beliefs because they don't follow the church, and they don't follow Longhouse because we weren't introduced to that either. For me, I had my own resentments about my community because of the systems of like toxic masculinity that are rampant in my community. I faced most of my prejudice and discrimination from members of my own community. There was not any open, two-spirited Native Americans in my community, none that I knew that were proud of who they are. And so I faced a lot of discrimination and a lot of blatant attacks on who I was from my own community. And it caused a lot of resentment towards my own community. It wasn't until like my later 20s, I guess you would say, when I started making my voice heard, you know, by marching to council's chambers and demanding that they raise a pride flag, meeting with other community members that are from my generation that identify as queer, and older generations that have either lived a very rigid life where they haven't been able to kind of express who they were inside and never were able to explore those sides of themselves, and kind of get an idea of, you know, what needs to change in our community. And one of my statements that I made was like, you know, if people in council want to sit there and talk about having the community members' backs, well, you have to bring everybody to the discussion and bring back our traditional views. What I like the most about Two-Spirited is that it's spiritual. It has nothing to do with who you are sleeping with or who, you know what I mean? And like you said, people were held in high regard. And that was hard for me to comprehend because I was very much treated like I was not in high regard and I did not matter to my tribe. So there needs to be work there too, you know?
And that's why I think it was so important that we, you know, not only as a, you know, my company helping with PR and creative consult, but as a partner and just a human being to go and have this rally and this protest. And, you know, it's funny that they flew the American flag outside of council, but they wouldn't fly the Two-Spirit flag, you know, that they had made. And that was very telling. And, you know, they kept talking about bringing back traditions and bringing back traditions, but this is tradition, you know, and I thought that was very important. And we made history. It was the first time that, you know, any of the flags have been flown at all the casinos, gas stations, everything for Pride Month. So there were so many people who saw that back to representation and were like, oh my God, like I never thought that I would see this, and they felt safe.
I'm being recognized by my own community. It made me cry so many different times. Because I work at the casino and I actually didn't know that they were going to raise the flags up at the casino too. And I remember I was walking into work and I just happened to glance over my shoulder and I seen that the Two-Spirit flag was flying out front. And I immediately, you know, started crying. And I don't think I realized to the full extent how much that meant to me personally. And I couldn't imagine how much that meant to other people. Basically because, you know, the people that did support what we were doing had reached out to us in private, maybe because they weren't comfortable. You know, I don't think the reservation harvests a very like environment where you can, first of all, that stuff is never even talked about, you know. People like me and Ben are not talked about. So, you know, sorry, am I talking too much? I'll let you
No, not at all.
Ben's
Mitch,
not like I'm talking about.
Thank you so much.
Mitch, I just
No.
wanted to, I'm sorry, Kaz, I just wanted to thank you, Mitch, for all your effort, and Ben too, because I saw those flags. I was going by the Seneca Nation headquarters on 438 there, and I looked up and I was like, wow, I couldn't believe it, you know, because I've known so many people from Cattaraugus and other territories. My one good friend, when he'd go into Longhouse and sit down, everybody would stand up and move away from him just because he was who he is, just because of that. And there's so many other episodes of that. The other thing I wanted to add to this too, in mainstream LGBT communities, in white LGBT communities I'm referring to, there's a lot of racism there. And some of the most racist things I've heard have been from gay white men.
Mhm.
So here I go trying to make a connection or somebody just to make a friend or meet somebody, and I get this experience and this treatment. So within the mainstream or white gay LGBT communities, there is that racism. There's a lot of cultural appropriation. I was in New York City in 2019, 2019, where we, a bunch of us, like 80, 90 of us, marched in the Pride Parade there. And there were three people who was dressed up in as, they referred to it as a costume. And they were non-native, and they looked at, we're just dressing up. It's just a costume. We only dress like this for Pride. And yet we have 80, 90 indigenous people marching in that parade, and just like, what, are you serious? Are you kidding? It's like that appropriation, that racism is very much there. I know it isn't, and I'm so glad we're having this conversation, because again, I know this isn't, all about LGBTQ and Two-Spirit, but it is a critical component about how historical trauma have impacted many of our norms and our mores in our own communities. And out west, you see Two-Spirit much more visible. They have a Two-Spirit powwow in Arizona. They have societies all throughout the country about Two-Spirit. So more and more people are reclaiming our rights, our roles as we had traditionally and culturally.
100%.
And I was nudging him not because I wanted him to stop talking, because there was a really beautiful story that happened with one of his employees at work the day the pride flag was raised.
Oh, we had one of the people that I was interviewing back in May, because I've been working on my group, One Heart, Two Spirit, was a transgendered woman who works at the casino. And, she came up to me at work on my break when I was getting lunch, and she was crying, and she was so appreciative of seeing that flag. And what that meant to me was that everybody in our community was being represented. And that's why, like you said, it's not just about, this discussion isn't just about Two-Spirited, but it's encompassing everybody that is Native American and what it means to be Native American today, and what we can do together to work together to reclaim our place in this world, to reclaim our place in America. I think what he was mentioning earlier was that TV show, Reservation Dogs on FX. I've never seen anything that mentioned anything outside of smoke signals of Native Americans on TV, and that's showing a lot of progress, which I'm happy to see. But there's still, I think, a lot of stuff that needs to be worked on culturally. I think taking away things that are not ours, stripping away beliefs that are not ours, and kind of working on getting to the root of these traumas that affect all of us,
Yeah, and I'll just say, as I know Pete mentioned, like that's not the main focus of the topic, but it is, because we were discussing healing, and the work that you and Ben are doing is healing communities. People seeing that flag and crying, it's a beautiful thing, and seeing like, we're here and we have this person here who's advocating for us and for themselves, and just like sharing our stories, sharing that strength, and inspires others to do the same thing. And hopefully soon we'll see the pride flag and Two-Spirited flag flying everywhere.
I'd like to add to that, with the awareness and acknowledgement of your flag. So that goes hand in hand with the initiation of the healing process. So when you see that flag, you were feeling like, I would say, a lift of a weight that's on your chest, or all the buildup of that trauma. It just releases that, and it initiates the healing process. That a lot of our traumas and issues that have happened, once we acknowledge that or are aware of those situations, it initiates the healing process. So that's what I was gathering from when you saw your flag, or the pride flag, that you had a release of pressure and just overwhelming. It was initiating the healing process of what you were feeling. That's what I could envision when you saw that flag flying.
Yeah.
The acknowledgement of it.
I thought of too, like a lot of people that have passed before me, older generations that, you know, have suffered. So it was healing in a way that almost felt universal to everybody, even if you were not LGBTQ2S. Like it still brought a level of healing to our community as a whole.
Yeah, and I got healing too, and I'm not even Native, and I felt this sense of just
It was
like a weight
spiritual.
lifted. It was a very spiritual
It
thing.
was very spiritual.
Yeah, I think that, like what Mitch mentioned earlier, you know, you saying that you didn't realize that you were two-spirited until someone brought it up to you. You know, how many people will see that flag and finally, you know, ask that same question and realize something new about themselves that can help their healing and growth. You know, I think it's so important. And I want to just go back to you were saying, you know, the spirituality and how I think you said your grandmother, she was raised in, I don't know, Christianity or something, but thinking about Puerto Rico and, you know, how colonization has influenced them and the religiosity there, it's like Catholicism. And that's what I grew up with. And I didn't really know why or where my place was with that, and trying to figure out my own spirituality, really question, you know, where these beliefs are coming from and how they're hindering us, and what are the good parts we can take, can we improve on, and thinking about what are the traditions that we had before this, and what is the, you know, all the great things that was taught before, and thinking about our relations to each other and our connectedness and with land, and thinking about the importance of all of that as well.
You know,
I
Cass,
continue talking with all of you forever. I really would, because this is such a great topic, and I'm hoping we can do this again. But I'll just let each of you say final words. So I'll start with Joe, and then we'll go around. So any last points you want to make, or anything else you wanted to add to the conversation?
This has been great. I love to hear everyone's story. Um, and like Pete said earlier, the historical and trauma is out there. Just letting people know that it's there by itself will help people understand a native culture. And basically, you know, we are here. We're here to learn from each other, and hopefully, you know, we can lessen mental health issues within our communities. That's it. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Joe. Lisa?
Okay, I have a dog barking as well in the background. I'm honored to be here. I thank you very much for the invitation to be a part of this discussion. I learn things all the time, every time I'm a part of these discussions. I've been on a few calls with Pete. Hey, Pete. So, like I said, I learned new things all the time, every meeting that I have like this. And I thank you. I appreciate being here.
Thank you so much. Pete?
yeah, just if I could be, I'll be as quick as I can. And Lisa, I thought your name, you were familiar, and so it's really glad to see you again. And I know like a couple of people as well. Just if we extend this conversation about two-spirit to Native people, similar with mental health, all the models, awareness, or teachings around our health, and for Native perspectives, I understand it is that we don't separate mental health from the rest of who we are, because our physical health, our emotional health, our spiritual health, our mental health, our financial health, our environmental health, all those different factors are directly related to each other. So one of the things that I've seen sometimes that service providers do is that they only focus on one aspect of health, whether it's mental or spiritual, whatever. But we really need to think about how can we be inclusive of all of our elements as human beings, because none of us is just one thing. We have so many diversities within each of us. Another point, we talked about representation a little bit, and I agree that's really important, but it's also representation among people who have a good mind. Because about 2 months ago, there was a news report that there were 3 or 4 newly elected Native American representations in Congress, and which would be a good thing, one would think, but all of them voted against whatever the current administration was advocating for to support the American people. And all of them voted against that. You know, it was very along political lines. So you could have representation in different offices, but unless they have a good heart or have the really intention of the people and the community, I mean, for Native people, we've had our sellouts, we've had our people who have done damage to ourselves. So that's another part about representation is good, but it's also part of it. And I also want to especially thank Lisa and Kaz for Lisa for you joining on, because if you notice, we had 4 men who were going to be representing and participating. And I really appreciate, Lisa, that you bring in a woman's voice, because for Haudenosaunee, that woman's voice is so critical. And I'm just glad you're here tonight to Navajo talk about, we're all two-spirit because we all have a male and female spirit to ourselves, because we come from a male parent and a female parent. So again, lots more we could talk about. And Kaz, thank you so much for the invitation. And I'd love to connect with all of you afterwards on the panel, and because I want to hear more about what you're doing and support. So that's it. You know,
Yeah, no, awesome. Thank you. And you brought up something else that I wanted to talk about too. I think it was Ben or Mitch who mentioned like toxic masculinity, and thinking about that and how that really influenced, you know, the culture, because before like colonial impositions, right? And in so many different tribes and cultures, you know, people were equal. And that's what changed, you know, that's the change that it came with, and how we regard people. So, you know, just thinking about that and the influences of the people who do get to be in power, no matter who they are and who they represent, how that's influencing them as well. So just some more things to think about. And now Ben and Mitch, and then I also, sorry, Ben, please mention Off the Mask so I can show the graphic later too.
So this has been really great. It's been really great to meet all of you and to hear what you're all doing. And thank you for letting me share my story. It's been really great. I think that there is a lot of beauty and wonderful things about our culture. And I feel like there's a change happening with bringing more, kind of putting the spotlight on Indigenous people. And I'm really looking forward to see the progress, you know, because I'm really seeing a change in the youth really that are kind of taking the torch and, you know, getting back to who we are at our core. And it's just been great to hear about all the different areas of healing that are happening all across the country, really. And so I've been very honored to be here. So thank you again.
Thank you, Mitch. Ben?
Oh yeah, so I just wanted to say how amazing and beautiful this conversation has been. And I'm very grateful, Cass, that you allowed me to be a part of it. And I'm glad that I got to meet, you know, all of the panelists and everybody who joined. And I'm also going to be walking the runway, so to speak, in Off the Mask. And it's a celebration to end the stigma of mental illness. And it's going to be held in Albany, 60 State Street, I believe, September 10th. And it's going to be a night of fashion, art, and music. And I'm sure Cass will post my donation page. I'm fundraising $3,000. I think I have about 700 so far. What? So I'm hurting a little bit. But I'm really excited to share my voice and my experience of being an adopted Black gay male in an interracial relationship, and a Black LGBTQIA business owner. And there's so many people who don't have a voice or feel silenced. And I'm lucky enough to be able to be a part of this, to kind of be a voice for those that don't have one. And just a little self-promotion, Name Brand Lab, my visual design brand and PR company. We really like to work with a lot of companies, small businesses, big or small, nonprofits. So if any of you need any branding or anything, we would love to support.
Thank you so much. And you'll see Ben's link in this week's e-newsletter attached with this video, so you could always watch again if there's anything you missed. If you missed the beginning, everything will be on there. And I just want to thank you all so much for taking out the time to talk to me and talk to all of us today. It was such a great conversation, and I'm looking forward to having more just like this. Thank you all. Have a great night. And remember, we are going to have part 4 in a few weeks. So look out for that in our e-news. If you're not following, please follow us on Instagram, NAMI_NYS, and have a great night. And remember to try to do some self-care tonight. Thank you all.
Hi, thank you.
Bye.